Megan, stay close. Former DOJ Attorney Richard Serafini joins us now with more on this verdict. Again, former President Donald Trump charged 34 counts. What's your reaction? Are you surprised?
I am not surprised by the guilty verdict. I thought that the largest probability was that there would be that he would be found guilty. I actually thought there would be a split verdict. That there would be probably. I thought there might be as many as 16 counts of not guilty, with 18 counts of guilty. So I was a little surprised that it was unanimous, but I am not at all surprised that the verdict came in guilty.
So what happens now? How do we assess the prospect of what the punishment is here and prospect of jail time?
The first thing that happens is that the former president will have a probation interview. He'll be interviewed by the New York State Probation Department. That'll collect background information to give the judge a fuller picture of the defendant. And it may seem like it may not be necessary in this case, but it will be helpful. It'll talk about his background, things that may not be quite public knowledge. That'll go into the judge's determination as to guilt. As to sentencing. The judge will set his sentence in several weeks out, and maybe as many as a couple of months. At that point, the judge will sentence him. He can sentence him from anything from probation to 4 years incarceration. The counts, whatever the sentence will be, if there's an incarceration, they'll be concurrent. I mean, he's not going to look at 4 years on each count of conviction. There'll be a maximum of 4 years, so it'll run from 0 probation to 4 years, or perhaps some alternate type of sentence. But that remains to be seen. But that's the parameters of the sentencing.
Yeah, looking at a live shot there of the Manhattan court where a jury, if you've just joined us, has found former President Donald Trump guilty on all 34 counts that he faced at the hush money criminal trial. We're talking about what comes next. And I guess my question is how this shapes what he is able to do in the election, if he's able to go out and campaign, as I was just asking Megan, if he's able to raise money. Obviously, it reshapes the arguments and is a stunning development. But legally, are there any ramifications for him in this election?
At this point, no. At this point, the same restrictions that were imposed pre-trial and during the trial will exist. So there'll be nothing that'll stop him from campaigning. There'll be nothing that'll stop him from raising money for his campaign. He will be able to continue to do that. I'm certain that as soon as or certainly within the 2-month time frame that's allowed after the sentencing, his attorneys will file a notice of appeal, and the case will be appealed. But as far as any legal restrictions on his campaigning, on his fundraising, there won't be any.
Little color from the courthouse that we can report. We've heard that the former President Donald Trump sat stone-faced when the jury delivered its deliberations and its report, and that he was just looking down at the table. I guess one of the questions is, will he appeal, and what would be the chances of that working in his favor?
I think he's absolutely going to appeal. I mean, you have an appeal as of right, and there's no reason for him not to appeal. There's a relatively novel use of the law in this case, and that may be the main ground of appeal. In all honesty, most appeals fail. The likelihood of there being a reversal or the appellate court vacating this conviction is probably pretty small, but it's not zero, and I'm sure that the defense will appeal as soon as the judgment is finally entered, and that'll happen after the sentencing.
9.5 hours of deliberation, I mean, does make you, it could have gone on a lot longer. This morning, they were reread some of the legal guidelines from the judge that they had been read, including how to assess credibility of the witnesses. And one of those questions was around Michael Cohen. And I do wonder, as you have been following this case, what you made of his testimony and how much you think that factored in here.
Well, I think that clearly at this point now, in hindsight, one of the things that the jury was interested in was what are the instructions and how are we permitted, or what are the standards for assessing Cohen's credibility. I think that the prosecution did a very good job of laying out a whole series of factors separate and apart from Michael Cohen. They laid out facts, documents, communications to basically tell the story in the absence of Michael Cohen. And they used Michael Cohen basically as a narrator. They were then able on summation to say, look, this case is largely proved without Michael Cohen, just on the evidence that we have submitted. But where Michael Cohen testifies, don't believe him because he's Michael Cohen. Believe him because there's other evidence that corroborates everything that he says, or there's circumstantial evidence that if you look at it is such that there's no other plausible explanation other than the one that Michael Cohen is giving. And apparently the jury accepted that argument and was persuaded that Michael Cohen was, at least in this instance, telling the truth.